Hi there, Nick here from Trainer Plus. Just want to talk today a little bit about an infographic we put out looking at gyms versus grocery stores and the safety of both. As the reality of COVID-19 pandemic sunk in and gyms closed down, I heard a lot of skepticism from family and friends and questions from customers, trainers and gyms about what it might look like when they would be able to reopen and restart fitness businesses. So people were very apprehensive about the risks that posed by gyms as there was still so much uncertainty about the virus itself. Gym owners were concerned about how many of their members would come back and whether they could regain public trust on the overall safety of gyms in this new paradigm and this new mindset. Now, with gyms reopened in most of the country, it's important to understand what health and safety measures have been put in place for staff and members. And in spite of what you may think, gyms are in fact in many ways more clean and pose less risk compared to essential services such as grocery stores. Now, I want to be really clear. I'm not saying that gyms are necessarily safer than grocery stores, because there are big differences in both, especially because of the breathing rate you have in gyms and the nature of COVID being airborne, as well as in a lot of places masks being mandated in grocery stores at all times, whereas not being mandated when working out. So there are things that balance these risks as both go, and you can hear a lot more about that in a podcast that we're putting out soon, where we interview Dr. Greg Wells, who's a respiratory expert, who talks about how the virus spreads and the risks of it, and how safe gyms are. So I don't want to say gyms are necessarily safer, but I just want to talk a lot about the things that gyms are doing to make them as safe as possible, and how in a lot of ways gyms are going above and beyond a lot of the measures you see in grocery stores and retail spaces. So just looking at our infographic, and then I'll put it up here on the screen so people can see it, and we'll go through and break these down sort of one by one. So first of all, spacing. Based on government guidelines, gyms have had to adhere to strict spacing restrictions to ensure physical distancing at all times between members. This not only means blocking off areas on the floor and spacing equipment that keep people at least 2 meters or 6 feet apart, but it also means having strict traffic flow in and out of the gym, and also having limits and spacing in change rooms. In many cases, keeping certain areas of change rooms like the showers and saunas, things like that, closed. If possible, gyms are using different doors in the club for entrance and exit to ensure that traffic flows without violating these distance rules as well. So in some cases, there are even further distance requirements in place for cardio equipment in classes, depending on the province. Once on the gym floor, people have their prescribed box or equipment is spaced out from the next user. So in many cases, even physical barriers have been placed in between. And there's strict limitations on the number of people that can be inside, either based on a percentage or the total square footage. So really strict rules around spacing and adhering to that, so people really are truly spaced apart. So if you contrast that with grocery stores, while there are markers on the floor for traffic flow and to keep space and posters up to remind people, these are sort of loosely enforced at best. Who hasn't been in a grocery store or other retail store and had someone walk right past them going in the opposite direction in the aisle, for example, or be within 6 feet of them. So there's definitely a contrast there when you go look at grocery stores compared to the very strict spacing rules that gyms have. In terms of booking, given the limited space, the total size of member bases, and then the physical distancing restrictions that they're having to use, gyms are actually using booking systems for members to reserve their spot in the gym ahead of time. So many are using online systems for people to book in and treating the spaces mentioned above like spots in a class. So you're booking that block in the gym for yourself for a prescribed amount of time. So it means that people are selecting their time and in many cases their space before coming in, and can ensure that the gym is never over the capacity and spacing limits. Moreover, many gyms have time limits. So in most cases, it's 1 hour for workouts, and that way you ensure that people can get through the facility in the hours that are open and to leave proper time for cleaning in between workouts and classes. Stores, on the other hand, while they have similar limits to capacity, they don't have any real pre-booking system, and people just show up, get in line, and then enter when the security guard tells them to. So while they're keeping counts for the most part to ensure that they are not, at or over their limits, it is not as precise as the gyms knowing exactly how many people are inside and who they are at all times. Which kind of leads to the next point, contact tracing. So given the booking systems and the fact that every gym has information about each member, like their name, their contact, their address, etc., there's a built-in contract tracing system for every gym. So even if they're not using an online system for bookings and they're using paper and pen sign-ins, they know the times in and out of every member. If there were to be an occurrence of a customer who did happen to have COVID when they were working out, the gym can immediately know who was in the facility and at the same time and put an action plan in place to notify people that could have been affected. So the limits on classes and workouts further limit the potential pool of people that could be exposed and the total exposure time that they could be subject to. And we've seen this in action because we have had incidents, even here in Canada, where somebody has tested positive for COVID after being at a gym facility, and those clubs were able to notify everybody right away, let those people know they needed to get a test and or quarantine or whatever it was, and we're able to take action very quickly on it. So we've seen that in action. So stores, have almost no way of doing this in the same form of contact tracing. They do not know exactly who is in the store at any given time, nor do they have their contact information to notify them quickly and effectively if an incident does occur. So what we've seen from instances of this happening so far, the best they can do is they can put out a statement in the news to let the general public know of a window of time and locations that were potentially exposed and have them act on their own to get tested or self-quarantine. So while there are apps out there to help with contact tracing, many have not been launched or seen widespread adoption yet or gotten over some of the privacy concerns of the public to effectively contact trace in a more passive way through geolocation data on the phones and in the ways that those have been set up. So it can be argued that gyms have the most effective built-in contact tracing available for any type of consumer business. Screening. So almost all gyms have also implemented pre-screening questionnaires for staff and members for every time they enter the facility. And this is something that is not only built into the Fitness Industry Council of Canada, the FIC's guidelines for gyms, but also being built directly into the online booking systems. So whether digitally or with paper and pen, people have to answer no to all the pre-screened questions before they're even being allowed to enter the gym. Furthermore, some facilities are also implementing temperature checks or other types of biometric scanning to take it even a step further. And if you've gone to your gym yet and experienced this, you've seen that, having to book in and having to answer that questionnaire ahead of time. So everybody is getting pre-screened. So while there are general guidelines for the public to not go out into a crowded space or store if they have certain symptoms or conditions, and there is a mandatory 14-day quarantine for those that have traveled, there are almost no pre-screening methods happening upon entry, especially here in Canada, where the incidence rate and the community spread has been fairly well controlled. So can you remember a time when you've been asked questions about symptoms or potential exposure, or better yet, had to do a temperature check before heading into any kind of store at this point in time? Disinfecting, here's a big one. So even though disinfecting equipment was something that was already part of the gym culture before the pandemic, it has gone to an entirely new level now. And I know that pre-pandemic, not every member was necessarily super diligent about spraying everything down with each use. And I've heard some people say that gyms were less hygienic than other places because of the nature of people sweating and breathing hard inside. But this has changed drastically with COVID. So unlike stores, gyms have spray bottles and wipes located at several locations throughout, with signs and staff encouraging people to use them every time they're done. That was sort of what the standard was. Now, this is not only mandated in government guidelines, but gyms have put strict systems in place to ensure that this is followed diligently, and members are hyper aware of the need to do so. So in some cases, members are given a preset group of equipment to use throughout their workout, which must be sprayed down thoroughly when they are done. Many gyms are adopting a system where the after equipment is used is put on sort of a red rack to be disinfected by staff before it returns to a green rack where it can be used again by someone else. So there's spray bottles and wipes on almost every machine. There are periods throughout the day when no members are allowed in between bookings for staff to do cleaning of the whole gym, and the nightly cleaning routine is more robust and thorough than ever, some even using misting machines or other devices to cover every corner of the facility. So you've also seen increased staffing to do this, staff following around to spray down and clean up. There's increased expenses in staff for gyms for nightly cleaning as well. It's really the big focus that gyms have had, where as soon as you're done using a piece of equipment, it's getting sprayed down. So what do you have in stores? I mean, there's hand sanitizer on the way in and the way out, with masks that are either strongly recommended or in most places now mandated. And while these efforts do minimize the risk for coughing and sneezing, and at least starting with disinfected hands, there's nothing preventing people from picking up items and then putting them back on the shelves. So what about trying on clothes or touching fabrics, as I've heard examples of as well? Are items taken off the floor to be disinfected before they're put out for the next customer? In some cases, yes, but not nearly to the complete degree and almost militant fashion that this is being done with fitness equipment. Communication and industry guidelines. So with gyms having information on for all of their members, this not only helps with the communication for contract tracing, as mentioned above, but it also means that clear health and safety guidelines have been communicated ahead of people coming back to the gym. So before gyms were even allowed to reopen, the entire industry in Canada came together under the FIC to devise a set of guidelines for gyms of all sizes, and these put the health and safety of staff and members first. From there, provincial coalitions were formed to work with their governments in devising the timing and recommendations for reopening. These guidelines were shared throughout the industry and as a blueprint for gyms, and many took them and added even more things for their own locations as they prepared to reopen. The next step there was informing staff, making sure that they were trained on these guidelines, which included many of the things mentioned in this blog, in addition to PPE, touchless entry and check-in systems, response plans, and just about anything you can think of. The last step in these plans were that they were clearly communicated to members in order to manage their expectations and make sure there was trust built about how safe the gyms were before the doors were even open for them to return. For stores, there are a set of guidelines that they had to follow and were communicated to the public, staff training, and then signs and posters in stores and some social media posts to get the message out publicly to the followers. And while this did ensure that there was a set of standards for the industry, most stores acted independently to interpret and implement them to meet the government requirements, as opposed to the industry-wide consensus that went beyond government recommendations in fitness. And just think about the first time you went into the grocery store or pharmacy after the lockdown started. Did you have a really clear idea of what to do? Had you been emailed a comprehensive set of guidelines that the store was following that you could read over and know what to expect when you went in? So not really. For the most part, you went in, there was signs, there was maybe some staff kind of directing you around and knowing what to do, but it wasn't as clearly communicated. The nature of the relationship of gyms to their members allowed for a much clearer communication and adherence to these protocols to be put in place for everybody, which includes if somebody also violated these protocols. If someone came in and, didn't wear a mask in or wasn't safe or wasn't spraying down, the gyms have the ability to freeze the membership, talk to the member independently in an email, a phone call, offline with having their contact information. The staff, okay, just think about the focus, training, and education of fitness staff. Now, there's obviously a range of experience, expertise, and abilities, and admittedly, in the fitness industry, it's not without, its fair share of meatheads as well. But the general focus of the staff and clubs themselves is centered around health and well-being. This makes them even more conscious of their own personal health and that of their customers, and by extension, public health. The importance of fitness for mental and physical health and disease prevention has become even more heightened with this pandemic. People have gained weight, they've struggled with anxiety, other mental health issues, and paid more attention to their immune systems than ever before. Evidence has also shown that being active and fit can not only help prevent COVID, but it can also help in recovery. People miss their gyms, and fitness professionals not only miss their members and clients, their routines of being in the gym, but they became even more aware of how vital a role they played in people's lives of keeping them healthy and happy. Throughout this time, I've heard so many stories the past couple of months from customers of ours, trainers in gyms, about how their clients or members went from sort of apathy at the start of the pandemic to doing something to find a new routine at home to, almost jonesing to get back to the gym and training as soon as they could. Now, I don't mean to disparage the retail, food, and restaurant industries in any way in saying this. In fact, if anything, I think the public has a whole new appreciation for the people that kept our shelves stocked and risked their own health so we could stay fed, clothed, equipped, and generally had access to any of the things we needed to live in lockdown at home. The definition of an essential worker changed in many ways. Everyone became part of the healthcare system. And as this new awareness about health and prevention is more top of mind for everybody, in general, the fitness industry has a more acute focus on living and supporting a healthy lifestyle. So we've all been getting groceries for months now under these circumstances, and thinking about whether it really is safer than the gym. There are risks to any place and activity now, and yes, getting food is essential, but for many, so is getting their workout in, keeping their immune system, physical and mental health. And not everybody has been able to transition to home workouts as successfully or as easily as getting into the environment of the community, the gym. So the fitness industry has worked really hard to be able to reopen in as safe a way as possible to minimize risks and put the health and safety of staff and members first, and are ready and welcoming people back in now. So just keep that in mind, because that question of how safe is the gym, it's you can't say it's necessarily safer than all these other places, but with the stuff that's in place now, gyms are as safe as they possibly can be, and there's a real focus on it. So just remember that, and please support them by going into your local facilities or looking for other online options that they're providing, so that you can support them and keep them moving it, so that when you do feel comfortable and do feel safe going back into the facility, they're there to help support you and support your fitness. So if you want more content about the future of fitness and how the pandemic has changed the industry, you can follow our social channels, subscribe to our YouTube channel as well to see more. We're doing more, producing more podcasts with interviews from leaders in the fitness and healthcare industry to cover these topics and more. Like I said, we've got one with Dr. Wells coming up that was a really fascinating conversation about where the science, meets the economics of it all, and what we really know about COVID and how it spreads. And we've got some other fitness experts who have led the charge in reopening here in Canada, and what they've experienced, and what the early signs have been as they've reopened as well. So some gym owners, some operators as well. So stay tuned. Keep in mind, check out our YouTube. Look at our podcast is going to be available on Apple and Spotify. If you're a trainer or gym owner operator, you can check out our website for more information about our platform and the tools that you can use to adapt your business and provide more online content and support options to grow your business. Thanks and happy training.